these ideas and talking points already exist, and I'm finding ways to communicate them. And that's why I say presented by Samuel Ross rather than made by Samuel Ross. I didn't make up these social constructions. I didn't make up the tensions and disparities, but I'm presenting them in such a new way.
I think it's definitely going to become this new type of communication, thinking about how objects and components can live on top and outside of the shoe itself. And I think it brings on an interesting conversation how sculpture and shape and additional materials start to grow on type of shoes. You know, like for example, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw like wooden components or removable components now sold with footwear as like a future premise and a way of communicating. It frees up the shoe so much, you know, and it frees up the opportunity for customization and collectible aspects of a piece of footwear. Well, I think that fly leather, firstly, is a brilliant innovation that Nike have introduced into the market. It's going to change the face of how we produce shoes. For example, being able to recycle the trimmings and offcuts of leather and compress them into this new material, which can then be produced into flat sheets, it opens up how leather is used in footwear for a start. You're able to screen print onto leather, to foil and deboss into leather and vinyl onto leather a lot easier than you haven't been able to do before, which is a huge step forward in innovation of the material. Also, now you can produce shoes in a more efficient way. You don't need to cut separate panels, which can often lead to messy stitching. What you can do now is, as we've done on the Air Force, is you can laser etch in and perforate into the footwear a lot cleaner. You know, even the suede finish can be a lot more controlled now, which means that you get a cleaner and lighter and more efficiently produced shoe. And that's what design is about. That's what I represent, being able to push the boundaries in design. And this is what Nike represents also, innovation. So being able to work with them on a new technology and kind of pioneer this new way of producing footwear and garments is huge, you know? I think that this is really, for me, this is the beginning of an environmental journey in fashion. And it's something that I don't take it lightly. I could say so many things of why I agree with why there is being a push in, but what I'm working on quite heavily now is looking at renewable technical nylons. So my move into renewable and environmental friendly propositions in design is going to be quite a substantial one. We're working quite closely now, myself and my team, with mills to find ways to produce more renewable and more like eco-friendly ways of producing materials that can be embedded long-term into a cold wall. The cold wall is actually like, I had a small clothing line before, but a cold wall is really like the epitome of you know, an art project in the form of clothing. And really the asterisks and the accent above the C came from the idea of being able to reduce down and take specific components, and it's going to get to the point where you'll just see an asterisk and you'll know it's a cold wall. It's about design reduction and process again, you know? I think presented is a really interesting, it's an interesting word. It's more so the art exists and I'm facilitating the art. These ideas and talking points already exist and I'm finding ways to communicate them. And that's why I say presented by Samuel Ross rather than made by Samuel Ross. I didn't make up these social constructions. I didn't make up the tensions and disparities, but I'm presenting them in such a new way. Yes, all of the soundscapes and scores for all of the runway and video for a cold wall. It's exactly that. It's knowing like the power of audio and sound is just as powerful as sculpture and garment, and understanding that my preferred way of communicating is across all sensory forms of deprivation rather than just through the physicality. It's also the temperature, which plays such an important part in our runway shows. And for me, I've been producing audio and music for around a decade now, 12 years in fact. So it feels such like a natural and organic component of a cold wall to be able to master and control the sound experience associated with the clothing. No,
music side?
I think that my passion comes from sound design.
Okay, so
But I do think that, music communication, and this is something that Virgil does so well, is such a important component to how people relate and how people bond and gel together. It's like music and fashion are the key components that we need. And I think those two components, they're necessary, but what they've done is they've been able to cross over borders that physically we can't cross, Yeah.
she's your right hand.
Yeah, that's my right
assistant,
hand.
right?
Yeah.
And, actually, my name is Yi too.
Yi started out as my assistant, but she's way more than that now. She's still my right hand, but she's like, we have such a creative synergy that we're just on the same wavelength, and that's something that we've worked on for a long time to kind of build that cohesion within the team. I think that it's trust. It's more trust than control. Yi heads up, the majority of our retail relationships on global distribution, but it's that trust and purity in intent, which is why we're able to work so efficiently together. Yes, it's still going to happen, but there's no rush. There's so much great work that I've yet to produce, and so many ideas and concepts that I need to manifest and put out into like the world and into the universe and into society. But architecture is a huge goal of mine to work into the master plan. And of course, working with the Architecture Association in London, it's a phenomenal world-famous school, the best of its kind globally, has really been a stepping stone in that relationship and in that pathway.
So one of my favorite architects is actually Zaha Hadid.
She's amazing.
Yeah. Well, she did a series of buildings for Beijing, Soho.
Yeah.
So one of them in Guangzhou actually saved my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So at one point I was like very depressed, but the energy around the area really shrink me down.
Wow.
So that's how I get better. And so
Architecture is there to serve. Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I feel like I embody the idea of like the multi-disciplinary designer already, but that's something I'm going to continue to push and like refine. It's the future of communication. It's not just about design anymore, it's about communicating with people and connecting with people. It's not just about clothes and producing cool things, it's about having intent behind what we're producing, The main theme behind my like tattoo work, ranging from like, the tip of my fingers to my torso, my neck, the tattoos on my head, is the idea of, for me, the Renaissance period of design, which was, of course, really came to height in Italy, and then the ethos of like, Greek liberalism, and also a mix of what I believe to be like tribalism. Those three components for me are perfect forms of communication. Some of that communication is based in a foundation of where I'm from, with like the more so tribalistic markings that you can find in my tattoo artwork. Some really, for me, like the Greek aspects, that's really like, Socrates and his workings coming through, and his way of viewing the world and where we're sitting it really inspire me as a whole, not just as a design ethos, but as on the ethos of how you should live your life. So that's where the Greek columns and that influence comes in. And of course, Renaissance architecture and the ideology of technology, science and art, all cross-pollinating for me is such an absolute form of how we can live in society. That's a huge influence, and that's found in the form of cathedrals on my body, Renaissance figures and sculptures, the idea of the Renaissance sundial being overlaid with the like African tribalism, West African markings that can be found in Benin or Niger, all overlay, and they're all influences on me, which is why they are literally scarred into my body, because they're almost pillars of communication and ways of being that I hold dearly, No, I think that these personas and personalities have embedded themselves as entities. So one of those entities is polyphene optics, which is youth, raw energy. The second is concrete objects. Of course, the macro of them all is a cold wall. And the third are the fourth are the soundscapes I produce. So there's still these multiple ways of communicating and representing myself. Now though, they've just refined into different artistic fields. But that energy is part of who I am, it's part of my way of communicating, it's part of my personality, it will always be there. In regards to producing a collection, or?
A collection.
Okay, so when it comes to collections, I start with really forming fictitious case studies. So I think about social disparities, or I think about the day-to-day happenings that I see and witness in London or around the world. So a lot of my runway work is based on social occurrences, whether they be positive or whether they be incredibly realist and sometimes have quite like a downtrodden tinge. What my goal is and how I start these collections is by looking at everyday people. From there, I often look at books that I'm reading at the time, as they tend to influence me quite heavily, and then I often pair or look towards architects or fine artists for influence. I don't really look at fashion for influence when it comes to designing collections or runways. I look at artists who paint the world that they live in. That's where I look for inspiration when I build a collection. And I often start by producing these mood boards or think pieces which are maybe 50 pages long of me just kind of writing to myself about themes that influence me, whether the themes are based on tension or pain or joy. And from these key words, I start to build visual mood boards, images that summarize the world we live in, that relate back to these key words, that also relate to the social themes that are interesting me at the moment. And then from there, shapes and forms which relate to the words and images are built. So there's a whole process. It's like building layers of a building. You know, you start with what's happening on the ground, and then from there you echo that upwards, and you bring in other influences, different panels of glass, you could say, different materials to build that structure with. It's like building a building. So it's a process, and my team are always saying I take quite a while, but for me, the narrative and the theory and the concept has to be very concise and absolute before we begin developing clothes. I think I'm intense. I think I'm intense, yeah. I think I'm incredibly passionate about my work, and I'm incredibly, my endurance level is really, really high when it comes to work rate and whatnot. So I think there's more of an intensity than that OCD, and that intensity can be a quick fire decision, or it can be a really focused study session, you know?
That's all my questions.
Brilliant, thank you, bro. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you.